Y'all, welcome back to Kentucky Fried Wargaming, where two guys who aren't qualified to talk about anything decide to talk about a game with hard math and chance. I'm Joe.
And I'm John.
And on this episode of the podcast, we're kind of busted our brains. As you see, the past few weeks, we've got a couple of new codexes. We got one new codex and two new battle tomes. They have different words for different game systems.
They're the same kind of rulebook thing, though. Really. There's some minor differences, but they're basically the same.
I would argue yes, but some people get real sticky with the terminology. However, GW essentially put out some new rulebooks for their war games, and the newest one for 40k, which was Orcs, which I dove into, and then they put out two for 3rd edition of Age of Sigmar for Orc War Clans and Stormcast Eternals.
Which I have been delving into as well.
Yeah, and John and I both kind of had a communal realization that as we both went through our separate books, we kind of got to a point where we went, what? As these books are way more in-depth than some of the others have been in the past. And especially in 40k, there's kind of a long pattern of that to look back on in the new edition. And figured it might be something worth talking about, because these books seem to be getting to be more complicated at an exponential rate.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the differences, because I think there's one clear, distinct difference between AOS and 40k, and we'll get into it later, on the complexity of these books. But yeah, it seems to be a continuing problem in some ways, and a benefit in others. So we'll talk about it. I've been playing the game since, 6th edition 40k, back before there was an Age of Sigmar. I've been doing war games for 10 years. I've worked on multiple game systems for LARP. I've done a lot of tabletop RPG game stuff. I've written stuff for homebrew, stuff like that. So I know a decent amount about rules, and Joe can attest that he does too. Right, Joe?
Yeah, I will say I am the less crunchy of the two of us. I'm more flavor than crunch, but I was also on the LARP design team that John was on. We made rules for games that hosted 100 people at a time. I'd say average, probably 85. I think our biggest was 106 people on site.
Yeah, I think so.
So I am not new to the idea of rules, and there's always something to be said about complexity versus usability. And I think it's just an interesting conversation to have, especially in the war game space, where you have a vast range of player types who want very different things from their books, I suspect.
Yeah. And we have different almost cliques of player types as well.
Yeah, it does get a little, how would I put it? Tribalistic?
I wouldn't go quite as far to call them tribes, but I will say that there's a air of it's weird. It's a hard thing to explain. That's probably gonna be a whole episode of its own, is talking about the differences in community between competitive players in 40k and casual players in 40k, and reverse that for Age of Sigmar, and then also how those two communities themselves are kind of different, and produces different types of conversations about the different games, despite the fact that the games are very, very, very similar. Wouldn't you agree, Joe?
Yeah, I think despite the similarities, you're going to have some pivotal but small differences, and those small differences can kind of grate on some people. But maybe we could break them down and kind of at least walk it out for people. So if you're someone who wants complexity, we could explain exactly how you get it and why. And if you're someone who maybe turns away from complexity, maybe we could help you with that. At least that's the hope. But first, hobby time and games played. All right, John, hobby. What have you been up to?
Well, I haven't painted a miniature in weeks.
But yes.
That's because I've been busy. I have done hobby things, though. I have been buying stuff to make my space more organized, which I think is just as important as actually doing the thing.
I would argue yes.
I've been researching the things that I'm going to, the future purchases I'm going to make hobbying less laborious to start and more easy. I've taken a lot of inspiration from different like YouTubers out there, like Miniac and like Ninjon, and a couple of other folks, even Vince from Warhammer Weekly, of like getting an idea for like what makes me want to paint more.
Mm-hmm.
And like building my space around that, so that when I, walk into my office, I can look and go, hey, that makes me want to, paint. Like I've been putting art up on a corkboard near my paint desk, so when I walk into the room, I don't just like walk to the computer and then load up like Destiny 2 and play video games. I like,
yeah,
I will look at the art and go, man, I kind of want to paint, and I'll look over at my desk and I'll see that my stuff's organized. I'm like, man, I want to paint. And the only thing stopping me right now is that I then look at the rest of the room and go, oh man, I need to unpack.
Yeah, I feel that. But anything to keep the motivation sort of stoked, I think, is worth its weight in gold when it comes to hobby progress.
Yeah, and for games played, for similar reasons, also haven't been playing the game. But I've been making plans to play the game. I want to try to do some Crusade stuff for 40K, and I'm also just, I'm really all about these Cruel Boys, like these new Cruel Boys. Big stuff. Like I know for listeners of the podcast who've been listening for a few months, I was all about the Stormcast. I'm going to keep the Stormcast. I'm going to paint them. I'm going to play them. But I think that they're going to be like my little house army I have for when people want to play the game or try the game. They just come over and play like the Stormcast book. And we'll talk about that later in the episode too, where I think the Stormcast sit in complexity.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like I'm gonna work on Cruel Boys as like my AOS 3 faction with Skaven. Like my Skaven are pretty much done for now until they get a new book and new stuff. But I think I'm gonna work on Cruel Boys, the little bastard orcs. Big fan.
Yeah, they are a very deliciously flavorful army, and they're also complex enough that I'm not surprised that they kind of grabbed you. And they're just bastards. They're just like little bastards.
I do have this like predisposition to go, oh yes, the bastards. Love the bastards.
God, like I was listening to Dominion. It's the launch book that came out with 3rd edition, like the audio novel.
It's a pretty good book.
God, I hate those. I hate these orcs.
They're so mean.
They are. They're absolutely irredeemable, and
bullshit asses.
I must kill all of them. But I'm not surprised that you listened to that and went, "Oh God, they're so awful. Give me 100 of them."
Like, God, you're so shitty. Can I have like 30 of you? I'm gonna be sitting there with like my little lamp and my little paintbrush and my paint, and I'm like edge highlighting their robes and going, oh yes, who's a little bastard? You are, you little shit ass. Put it down.
God, you're so mean. Go out there and murder people. Set them down, pick up the next one. Yeah. I'm not surprised that they grabbed you. But hey, at least you're almost time to hobby. Because, John, I need hobby reinforcements. I've been hobbying my tail end off. Haven't played games, because much like John, as we have talked about for the past few weeks, I'm sure y'all are sick of hearing of it. We just moved into our first houses. And, there's a whole lot of real life stuff that needs to happen. And also, there's a whole bunch of fun hobby painting stuff that needs to happen. So I'm trying to do a whole lot of both at once. And it's going surprisingly well. During the week, I've been trying to paint about 2 hours a night. Because that's about all I can do. Because, you just got other stuff you have to make happen. You got to clean, you got to make dinner after work, and, take care of the yard, unpack, everything else that has to go on. But I find I can get about 2 hours a night in on most nights of the week. And then on the weekends, I've been pulling about 4 hours a day, give or take, just because my schedule's more open. I don't have like an 8.5 hour workday to deal with. So I'm hammering out progress on these orcs, John. Absolutely flying through them.
Big boy, big orcs.
Yeah. I really don't like painting in a batch of 20 though. That hasn't changed.
It's okay. You'll get used to it eventually.
I don't know, man. I think 10's the sweet spot. 10 is the sweet spot. Like, I'll go to, like, for people out there who maybe haven't listened to the previous episodes, I'm trying to paint up a Crusade force to play a Crusade game with some buds. Except, obviously, my orcs just came out like a week or week and a half ago, so I was like 2 months behind the painting race. So I am, like, trying to make up ground aggressively. And that means I have like 20 boys at the start of the campaign that I need, so I'm just going to paint all 20 of these Beast Snagga boys at once, because it just makes sense. But I'll go to do like a layer, like I was painting, let's say like the hides and cloaks on their back. I'll get through about 10 of them and go, that was satisfying. That was just the right amount of how much of that color I wanted to paint. Boy, it sure is nice to move on to the next cut. Damn it, there's another 10. And then you have to just grab the start of the other squad and keep on moving. Whereas if I was doing it in batches of 10, I think it would be much more satisfying. But in this case, efficiency tops satisfaction because I'm on a time crunch.
Well, once the time crunch is over, you can probably go back to doing 10-man blocks of painting at a time, and then like break that up with maybe some heroes or special units or like vehicles in between.
Yeah. I know that this is going to be the hardest part. Like, I'm not a person who likes to paint big hordes, so I knew that painting the boys was going to be the worst part for me. So I just wanted to front load it. You know, when the motivation was the highest and I had the most oomph, just do it first. Get the suck out of the way, and then move on to all the fun stuff that I'm super, super excited for. And if I'm being honest, even the boys have been fun to paint because they're very flavorful models. It's like Horizon Zero Dawn meets 40k orcs, and I'm big fan. Big fan. And after I get through these 20 boys, I've got 6 Squig Hog Riders that I'm then going to immediately transfer into. And I'd say I probably have another couple of hours left painting the boys. I've got to finish up the white bits of armor, which takes like 3 layers or 4 layers to like...
Yeah, it's rugged.
Yeah. So like I was making a whole bunch of progress, and then I hit that point and it was sort of like a time sink. I'd get through all 10 guys and go, God, all right, back to the first guy, and keep going. But
get yourself an audiobook and just chug through that white.
I have, yeah. I've been listening to Warhammer Weekly, of course. Vince Ventrella putting in the work. I've been listening to Doug from 2 Plus Tough telling me some lore and keeping me excited. And also, I got the audiobook. It is the first, I think it's audio only, and it's an entire novel from an orc perspective called Brutal Cunning. My dear God, if that hasn't kept me going.
It's very good.
It's incredible. The only downside is that it makes me, I know we all go, LOL, but no, it actually makes me laugh out loud, belly laugh. And that's no good when you're trying to paint fine detail bits. So sometimes I have to turn that off because it's a hazard. But I have been trying to keep myself going. And really, what's keeping me running to the finish line is having a Crusade deadline to meet. Well, not a deadline. There's no date set. We essentially are just going to play when everyone's ready. But, I have something to paint towards. And I didn't realize it, but over COVID, I think one of the biggest, pains to the hobby was that I had nothing to paint for. We weren't having get-together days. We weren't going to tournaments. Well, we didn't go to tournaments before, but you know what I mean. We didn't have leagues to paint for.
And we didn't have, tournaments to try to go to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We've talked about doing it, but, right now, it's man, cannot, can't even entertain the idea.
Yeah. So, I had nothing to paint for, year and a half? Has that much time passed? Realizations. Okay, moving on. But for that long, I had nothing to paint towards. And don't mind me, just having a tiny breakdown, but we're moving through.
Minor existential crisis in the middle of the podcast, but little plastic.
But I'm doing all right. I kept it together because I'm a professional podcaster.
Oh, we're both terrible at this.
But really, it was nice to have that feeling of something to paint towards, to strive for. And I'm enjoying that immensely. Just gotta keep it going. And also I have my hobby room put together in a state that I would call functional. Like, I have the paint table up, I have the airbrush hooked up, I have the brushes out, like I can paint. However, it's a little utilitarian in here at the moment. Like, it's all white walls, and I haven't got any of the art up yet because, it's the hobby room is not the top priority when you're unpacking a house to live in.
Speak for yourself.
Well, John, I kind of want to have a bathroom and a kitchen.
I mean, that's fair. I had the benefit of not owning anything, and so I didn't need to unpack most of it.
Yeah, we didn't own a lot, but that was kind of the problem, is that then we went, oh God, we have to go buy stuff. Because, we went from having one bathroom to having 3 bathrooms. We don't have enough, hand towels. Who the hell thinks about how many hand towels they have? All right, I guess we got to go to the store. Or, stuff doesn't fit in the cupboards. Well, all right, we got to go out and get more stuff and blah, 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 blah. It's been a pain. And of course, shipping stuff also makes it difficult because, in the hobby room, I need a bookshelf to be able to put, rule books and stuff on because, as this episode will tell you, there's a lot of rule books for these games. But I can't, find a bookshelf I like in stock because shipping and the whole world. So there's some challenges that I'm trying to work through. But I'm hoping soon I can get some art put up. I can get a bookshelf in here. I can unpack all the books that I've had packed away and make the space go from utilitarian to lively and beautiful. At least that's the hope. But I'd say, yeah, hobby's going well, but I got so much more in my future. And I'm going to kick you to also do so. Oh,
yeah, I'm definitely working on it. My next big hobby purchase before I start buying more models will be an airbrush, because I think that's going to be the key to getting myself to just push through some of this backlog I have. I think airbrush will make Space Marines a breeze, Stormcast easy, and I'll be able to experiment on this Cruel Boys the way that I want.
Yeah, I can tell you it's life-changing for the hobby once you get one. Just for the ability to prime, to throw down a quick base coat and zenithal and whatever else you got to do. Man, so helpful. I think it's going to light speed you ahead in how much you could do in the same amount of time. But this isn't an episode about airbrushes, John. So moving on to game complexity. All right, John. So if we're going to get into this, and we're going to talk about the complexity of the new books, I think first we have to kind of level set things with, what do we mean by complexity? When we say that word, what exactly are we trying to portray? Because that's a little subjective, admittedly.
Yeah, so these games have always been a little complex. These games are a little bit tougher than chess. And on a base level complexity level, right? Even something like Magic the Gathering or I don't know, another similar game. But these games people play, board games, stuff like that, there's different levels of complexity, right? You play checkers, it's different from playing Monopoly, and that's different from playing
of Catan,
Catan. Yeah. And levels of complexity and strategy. And in wargaming, for these specific games, fantasy / Age of Sigmar and 40K, you've seen the game go in varying levels of up and down with complexity, right? Old world Warhammer Fantasy, very complicated, lots of rules to understand, but that was part of the fun of it. It was part of the allure. Go to Age of Sigmar, it was supposed to be a much more simplified, streamlined game. And at the same time, they were making 8th edition 40K much more streamlined as opposed to the very rules dense 7th edition. And I feel past 8th edition 40K and past the first two, I almost said seasons, after the first two editions of Age of Sigmar, you've gotten into third. The complexity just kind of went up in both
Mm-hmm.
of these editions, right? At roughly the same time. The books are becoming bigger. They have got more stuff in them. There's more bookkeeping you have to do per phase. It's almost like they're trying to build engagement by having more stuff you need to be able to remember and have be aware of. And I think that's good, but there's some other parts to it. But I think that between these two games, 40K is the more complex one, and we'll use that as an example. You no longer have to just build a list, sit down, play, and then look at the data sheets for those guys that you have, right? It's now you have to have your list. You have to know what your stratagems are for that strategy that you're building. You have to know what all of the special rules and synergies are. You have to know what your army bonuses are. What does your specific subfaction do? And what their auras are, how those auras interact with other auras, and what their psychic powers are. And there's just these layered, customizable elements to each of these factions now. And it's not like it used to just be one, right? I remember playing 8th edition 40K, and this level of complexity that you're seeing in the Space Marine book now, and the Orc book, and the Necron book, and every book that's come out, the Dark Eldar book, this also used to be for the big brain factions, right? And we used to call them Galaxy Brain factions. We still call them Galaxy Brain factions. And now that's every faction. There's a certain level of Galaxy Brain that you can do with it.
I will say I was a little overwhelmed with how much was in the Orc book for 40K when I opened it. Because I am as some people would say, I'm a Timmy player, so I'm just here for a good time to watch cool stuff happen. And the orcs seemed like a very straightforward army that would do that, until I opened the book and was sort of overwhelmed with the amount of options and rules written in it. I mean, I'm just kind of looking through it, and you have specialist mobs that you can customize a single unit of your army, but only certain types of units with different customizations, but it loses their clan rules. You get all the clan cultures, which isn't too bad because I'm used to it, except some of them have complicated interactions which need FAQs. There's an exception rule on the first page for just general list building, which is already complicated and now only more complicated if you're playing orcs. And then on top of specialist mobs, you got custom jobs, which are ways to customize different types of units in your army, but they're not the same as specialist mobs because you just got to give them different names. And there is roughly 1 bajillion stratagems to memorize that can only be used by certain types of models, not to mention the specialized secondary objectives that you get access to. And then just looking at the data sheets, you have a bunch of those, but also 1, 2, 3, 4 keywords that you have to memorize before you even get into the book, because there are units all throughout it that have these keywords in them, in this just plopped in a small little area, but they don't actually tell you what they do. So good luck, better get to memorizing, just like everything else, bucko. If you don't know what Here We Go, Ramshackle, Mob Roll, and Beast Snagga all stand for, you're screwed. And very quickly, I was left going, I just wanted to play orcs. That's a whole lot of stuff for me to try to drink from a fire hose on. And I sorted through it after about a day or two of reading, but I'm someone who's been playing for a while. And it was difficult. I can't imagine what that's like for a new person. So, I mean, really, complexity is subjective, but I guess what we mean by it is sort of how many rules per page do you have? Or how many rules per model do you have? Or how much memorization do you expect? Or how many exceptions to the base rules do you have? All of these things add to complexity.
I'd like to think of it as this, right? If I pick up a book and I read it and I go through it, and I like to read that book as if I'm a new player and go, if I was trying to teach somebody how to play this game using this book for the first time at a 1,000-point list, could I teach them most of the mechanics of the game in a single game? And then add on to that with the next game? And I think the answer with 9th edition 40K is just no. I think you can't. I think you cannot give a new player all of the mechanics of the game from the get-go, the command points, stratagems, all that stuff, and get them to learn the game in a single game. I think that you have to play multiple. And I think that makes it very difficult to get newer folks into the game sometimes in a casual setting, because there's lots of people who just want to play game fun. On the flip side, I think that Age of Sigmar does something a little bit different in that, based off of the new Cruel Boys book and the new Stormcast book, there's layered levels of optional complexity, right? Like the Stormcast book is very simple in concept. Like it is mostly just good stat dudes doing good stat stuff, and they've got good rules to buff each other. The points are a little wonky, but probably can get fixed up. But the book seems mostly like for newer players.
There's not a whole lot of trickiness there.
The only problem I have with that book is that there's a lot of traps. Like there's a lot of traps in the book of, there's almost 100 war scrolls. Like the amount of leader war scrolls in that book are more than some armies have entire war scrolls for their faction. So there's a lot of things in there that are just not good, that people might accidentally pick because they like it, and I think that's a shame. I don't think that you should have a model that looks cool if you can't have decent rules for it.
That's another topic for another episode, though. Probably.
I think that
write that down.
The book as a whole is very simple in concept. Could probably teach someone most of the rules of AOS in a sit down with that book. It's one of the reasons why I'm going to turn my Stormcast that I have into a more starter faction, because it's a great teaching tool for teaching someone the basic game. And then if they want to keep playing, they want to come over to my house and play games. They don't have to buy into an army yet. They can play a couple of games and kind of get to know, like, when you dig in deeper, the kind of complexity you can get into, because that book can also do that, before dedicating into spending a bunch of money on this game. I think that's great for Stormcast.
Yeah. I mean,
Orcs, on the other hand, have I'm just gonna not talk about the tribal orcs. I almost call them snake bites, but that's 40K. Bone splitters. Yeah, I'm not gonna talk about bone splitters. Never been super fan of bone splitters in the first place. If you are, I'm sorry. They're super cool. It's just not my bag. Iron Jaws, very simple, very fun. Still the gonna punch you, gonna beat you, big beefy boys, punch you real hard. Very simple playstyle, very easy. They've gotten a little bit of changes, but they're still roughly about the same. It's pretty good. The new Cruel Boys, on the other hand, super sneaky bastard orcs. We talked about them earlier this episode in the Hub Progress. Huge fan of how complex and hard they are to play. And I like that in that book, there is a complete sub-factions different if you want to play very high complex Galaxy Brain, or if you want to play simple Smasher.
You aren't locked into either. You have options.
Very smart way of doing that. And if you want to do a little bit of all of that, a little bit of both, do Big Wah, and you can combine them. And there's not, one of the things I like about the book is that there's not really, short of Bone Splitters, because they're kind of bad, apparently. I think that they're not going to be that great. I didn't know a lot about Bone Splitters before, but apparently they're really bad. The other two, are pretty even. You're going to have fun playing either of them. And I think that's good. It's a pretty good design book. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Well, 3 out of 4 ain't bad, actually, because Big Wah is just as viable as the other two. But yeah,
at least
I think that
you have a way out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think the book's a lot more digestible because it is broken up into very distinct, clear, thematic chunks. And I want them to adopt some of that for 40K.
Yeah, because currently looking at the Orcs book, I've got my head around it, but if I was a new player and went, man, I read this for a few days and I still don't understand it, there's no simpler option. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's it. And I think that can be unfortunate, which we'll talk about in a few moments when we get to pros and cons. But the complexity is inescapable in 40K, at least currently.
Yeah, there's not really a big dum-dum faction, and it's weird because like the big dum-dum faction used to always be orcs or
Space
like
Marines.
Tyranids or like Space Marines, and they're not, or Necrons even to some degree, and they're just not
No, not
anymore.
at all. And I mean, that's not even getting into the added complexity of having even more rules for some armies and multiple other books, like these source books, like the Book of Rust and whatever, which also just really makes things more complicated and complex.
It does, and I have the same problem with like D&D, right? Like everybody talks about how like D&D 3.5 was so bad because it had so many source books or whatever. I thought it was great. But like towards the end there were so many source books and splat books that it got out of control. And in a competitive setting for 40K, I agree, because that's what these extra books are, like Book of Rust, it's all splat books. And I agree that does put a weird lens on the game if you are playing competitive or like pickup games with random people in which you cannot have a discussion ahead of time of like just not using some of that stuff. But I think that there's so much complexity in these books. You could never pick up any of those extra rule books and ever feel like you ran out of stuff to experiment with. And I think that's a positive. But, you know, it's also weird that you might go buy a $30 book for some lore and like 2 paragraphs of rules.
Odd. Very weird. But yeah, I think, that is just another layer of complexity of the sort of complex game that we're in right now, which for some people it's what they want, but for others might be a little difficult. But I think that does kind of lead us into what I think is the more interesting discussion is that, what do we think the benefits are to these more complex rule systems or codexes or battle tomes or whatever you want to call it? What are the benefits of being more complex?
Well, I think first off, the benefit of being more complex is that you can feel more satisfied with your purchase. Like, if I buy a $40 rule book and it's got like a ton of rules and a ton of stuff for me to experiment and theory crafted and build around and play with and like wrap my head around and be invested in and all this other stuff and get new models and make them cool and do these things, that's great. That's more value. That's just great for me, right? I am the guy who like loves the craziness of chaos, like factions in general, where there's 1,000 different ways to combo out and do weird stuff. Then invariably, I love making Rube Goldberg machines of armies or anything that, and my opponent eventually looks at it and goes, "But what if I just knocked your toaster over?" And I go, "Oh no,
my YouTube video's ruined."
Yeah, it's great. Like, a huge fan. But I know some people don't. Some people just want to pick up an orc army and put like 100 orc boys on the table and go,
"Wah, Mr.
Deal
Bond.
with it."
Wah.
Yeah. But I think that a positive in general is that a more complex game makes you feel like your army that you've picked for aesthetic reasons always has choices, right? Maybe you just really like orcs, like aesthetically, just really love orcs, and are willing to learn new stuff and buy more orcs and do more stuff for that one faction to stay competitive-ish, like competitive enough to play in your local friend group without feeling like you're losing all the time. Having more things to choose from as a toolbox is good for that player. Especially for someone who only wants to play one army, doesn't want to pick up multiple armies. They just want to play this one thing, and then that's their hobby. I think that's great, having that deep well of tools to choose from. Space Marines is another great example. Some people just really like to play Space Marines, and that's it. And having a deep well of stuff to pull from allows them to play stuff, And for some of these rule books, they aren't going to have as many models as, say, Space Marines to choose from, but maybe they've got more rules to choose from, which allow them to have more options and ways of customizing via rules instead of having to go out and buy new models all the time or wait for new models to come out.
Yeah, I can feel that, at least because I'm someone who likes to have options. So once I got my head around the orcs, I quickly realized, like, holy crap, there are 4 armies actually hidden in this book.
Yeah, you could just have four people, like you have a friend group of four dudes who all play orcs fighting each other, and that could be the whole game of 40k.
And none of them would
like,
feel the
out of
same.
that book.
Like you know, if you had someone who was running like all the Mad Max vehicles plus the planes doing like speed wah as they call it, that would feel very different for someone who's going like heavy beast nagas because they're kind of self-contained with their own keyword, and that would feel very different from someone who's going heavy into like flooding the board with orc boys and knobs. Yeah.
Like Green Tide.
Yeah, playing
Green
Goths
Tide
with like
Goths or
Gazgul,
something.
and that would feel very different from someone who's playing big stompy robots. Like there's a couple of different orc armies hidden in this book, and that's an incredible place to start because then you also get all of the options of mixing them together. So the amount of like list building potential, like while you're sitting around thinking all day, is immense. Absolutely immense. And I think that depth is welcomed, partially. Once I got over the hump of trying to like take it all in, there was a whole bunch of fun hidden behind it. You just got to get there. But I do think that leads to the con, or at least the biggest con for me. And that's that, man, if you were a newer player right now, whoo, I don't envy them. And I mean, obviously we run this podcast. We've talked many times about how our favorite thing to do is to help people learn the game. That is our absolute favorite thing to do in the hobby, is to take someone who's just interested but doesn't know where to start and help them, you know, play their first games or maybe buy their first small force or help them learn the basics of how to paint or whatever. And lately we've been talking to Lucas, if you're listening, shout out bud. Our bud Lucas, who was just getting into the game, and like he is having questions about, you know, how does this work? Like how do I memorize all these rules? He's playing Sisters of Battle, so there's just a whole lot going on, and what are the interactions? And it is difficult to get your head around it because there's just so much going on in one army on the table. You know, it's not like you have your war scroll or your data sheet that you look at and all the rules are listed there. I mean, there are auras going on and there are keywords listed there, and like
you almost need to take like notes and have bookkeeping and create your own little template before playing the game of what's the most important things.
Memorize the keywords, know what they all do, know what your weapons profiles are, have all those in your head, because some of those aren't on the data sheets also. And it's just, you know, it's a lot. It's a lot. And that's assuming that you get past the hurdle of knowing how to list build and pick detachments and whatever else. It's just that there's a pretty big hurdle to get over to get to the fun. And that hurdle looks like it would probably be pretty difficult for a new player trying to hop in. And if you have I think a lot of people are like, oh, it wasn't so bad for me, like I had help. And that's cool. And I would love if every person who got into the hobby had help. But some don't. Or sometimes the help they have, not very good. Or sometimes not even kind. That's rough.
And that's an unfortunate reality of part of this community, and I think that's something that, like, I will openly challenge anyone who is in the game, in the wargaming sphere, to try to be better about. I haven't always been the perfect person about this. I had to try really hard to get better at it, and I think that everyone should. Is if you want to keep playing this game with people, you need to get better at helping people learn the game and be supportive, like have a support network. And though the game may be complex, it might, you know, suck to play 2 games to somebody whom doesn't really know the rules and you kind of need to help coach them. I think that doing so creates a better, like, playtime. And if you can learn to find fun in the helping someone learn their army as you read the rulebook and they go, I can do this thing, and you go, holy shit, you can do that thing. Like, it does provide a different level of fun. And I think that it's important that if these rules keep getting more complex, or if they stay the same complexity, that we need to sit down with some of the newer folks who come and play as veteran players. It's kind of part of the social contract to go, hey, bud, how can I help you understand this better, right? And even if only like 1 or 2 people out of your friend group who plays this game are capable of doing that will help the entire group, right? Because I think that this game plays better in like a club setting or a group setting or like a local game store setting. Or like competitive is competitive. There will always be a competitive scene for every game. But most of the game is played at like kitchen tables or in garages or at local game stores. And if you can get in with a group of guys playing the game and you can be the guy who like when new people show up to play, you teach the more complicated rules to and help them like ease them in, man,
it's a good
great
feeling. It's a real good feeling. And it's also a great feeling to see them have the eureka moment when it all clicks. That's super gratifying. But you got to help them get there. And like the big con for this is that right now it is the hardest time that I have seen since I started playing for them to get to that eureka. You know, there's just a whole lot between the beginning of their journey and understanding.
I think that it's harder than it was in 8th edition, but it is not as hard as it was in 7th. And I think that once someone learns like the base level of complexity, the game opens up to be much more fun than 8th edition's like ceiling was, right? 8th edition's ceiling was kind of like the meta's been solved. Everyone kind of knows what the big boogeymen are. 9th edition has less like big boogeymen that make everyone go, I'm having a bad time. Everyone kind of has their own boogeyman they can use, or their own response due to the complexity of these rules. Like that is why that happens. But I think that the learning curve is much steeper. But it's not like 7th edition where you must memorize your entire rulebook, all of your different stats, and multiple algorithmic charts, and multiple keywords that you need to reference from a core book and how they interact with other keywords that interact with supplements that then interact with formations. Like the rules density of 7th edition is just, it's like they took all of the good parts from 7th edition that allowed for like customizable armies that could respond to new stuff that came out and yanked it and put it into the streamlined 8th edition, raised the complexity up a little bit and went, this is what we're going to do. And I hope it stays at that relative level and it doesn't get stupid crazy, which we'll see when Genes of the Cults come out, because that's going to be big telling.
That's going to be the most galaxy brain of the armies. So if that one comes in okay, I think we're going to be all right. Unless they decide that they're going to make Guard the new galaxy army, which would make me giggle myself laughing. God,
honestly,
hysterical.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I get that 7th was more complicated. However, that's why I didn't play in 7th, because I looked at it and went, no. When someone was like, it's really not that bad. Here's like, there's only 18 pages to walk through a building. No. Like,
hey, it was 17.
Just no.
Hear me out.
And I would hate for us to get to that point again. So I don't think we're there. I certainly don't.
I don't.
Because obviously new people are still getting interested. I'm just saying, you know, we have to be cognizant of the risk as we move forward. And as John was saying, as a community, this con we can mitigate with some effort. You know, we actually have a rope that we could pull on in this tug of war. Which...
Yeah, and I think that the other kind of stealth positive about this is that more complex armies create, like more complex and dense, rules-dense books create loyalty to a specific faction and less of a feeling of need of, I need to keep up with the power creep, or I always need a new thing to fight the new stuff that comes out. Because like Space Marines can still functionally fight against orcs right now. Like the Dark Eldar book that came out, very good still. Like the AdMech book, good. The Necron book's a little underpowered, but it still has stuff it can do, like especially in a casual setting. Like all of these books are relatively the same power level, which means, and they're all pretty dense, and they're all pretty customizable. So if you really only want to play one faction, you're incentivized to only play one faction. Like, GW is not incentivizing people to go out and buy like 6 books and 6 armies and then, Voltron them together to make the cool special army. It seems like they're moving more towards single codex, but dense codex armies. And I think that's just a better place to be. I've had the most fun in this game when I'm not bringing 3 separate base codex for chaos to a table with my army and like 2 supplement books to play this corn army.
Yeah,
so
I'm a
it's
big
functional.
fan of going, this is my mini case that has all of my orcs, and this is my orc book. All right, off I go. That's a delightful feeling.
Well, like, the new orc book, right? I think it's like if you took the 8th edition orc book and you slapped in all the supplements that you got for orcs throughout that entire edition into one book. I think it's just all of that put into one, instead of coming out with multiple books. My fear is that they're going to release more and more supplementary books that aren't just narrative focused, because most of the supplement books for this edition have been mostly narrative focused with very few additional rules. They're more set for playing in that narrative, ultimately. And I fear that won't always stay the case. I fear the day when all of the codexes have been released and they go, okay, Psychic Awakening 2.
Don't want it.
I won't, like, I don't want it.
No, thank you.
Like,
I don't want to have to bring 3 or 4 books to play a game. No. But we could fix that if we just did some stuff digitally. But that's a whole other topic for a whole other episode.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely something we'll dig into, is that, GW kind of needs to get with the times a little bit with some things. The 21st century, why are we playing games like it's the 90s again?
John, write that idea down.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I do think that there is some incredible complexity here that could make just a whole lot more fun. And I think that does lead us into the final question that we wanted to touch on. Do we think that this increased complexity is good for the game in the long run, and is it sustainable?
I'll go ahead and go first, right? I think that the current level of complexity for the game, for both games, AOS and 40K, is healthy. Like, I think it is a good place to be at, and we are just on that edge of not being healthy, right? A lot of people are like, oh, it's so much. Once people get used to it, if the people that are struggle in your play group are having a hard time, sit down with them. They can learn. It's really not that bad when you break it down for them. It's just a lot. It's just overwhelming. Like, it's like DMing your first D&D game, right? There's a lot of rules to keep track of. There's a lot of things you gotta understand. But when you really break it down, you can just like write down some notes about what's the most important thing for you, and you can go.
And I think one of the big challenges is knowing where to find that stuff. So just being able to give them like a page number is also goes a long way.
Yes. Or like help them build a template for like how to like for me, when I sit down to write an army, I write down like little note cards for myself for like my psychic powers or like the stratagems I most likely want to use, or like I'll make my own cards and stuff. Like, it just takes some time to prepare for the game beforehand, and then just keep doing that. Make a list and then keep playing that list for a while without changing it up too much, and you'll learn your rules pretty quick. But I think that going forward, I think this level is sustainable, right? Like, I think this level of complexity is sustainable throughout the rest of these codex releases, through all the battle term releases. And my hope is that instead of trying to augment the existing codexes with more rules, they try to release more factions, right? For AOS, we've got Chaos Dwarves. We've got like other factions that need to be released for AOS. We have a whole nother game coming out in the Old World re-release. But in 40K, like we haven't seen like new factions in a while. We've seen some like stuff that's basically been like re-releases of like older stuff. And I'm excited to see more of that. Like, World Eaters, can't wait to have them have their own army. That's great. But I think that going forward towards the end of this edition, if they instead just released entirely new races and factions from the science fiction universe into the game, it would make the game much better, and that is more sustainable in a weird way, even though you're having to make new ranges and introduce a whole new like faction, than it would be to release another Psychic Awakening series of books, because then you're going to push this complex game over the edge, and people are going to go, I don't fucking know about that. Like, because that's what they did with 7th edition. 7th edition wasn't always a, dying amalgamation of rules. It became that way because they kept releasing more and more supplementary rules. And there becomes a point where that is detrimental, and instead you just need to release new things for people to play, and then hopefully get in new players that way. And that way I think it's sustainable. But I think if they'd go the route of Psychic Awakening 2 or like a Broken Realms 2 that has a bunch of new rules in it, new lore, awesome, new like scenarios to play within those like battle zones and settings, awesome. I don't think that we need to keep releasing like splat books for these armies. I would rather just have very complex opening codexes for them and not release like these splat books. And it would make for a better game in the long run. Especially if they're not wanting to go full digital yet.
I liked what Broken Realms did, where they used it as a vessel to release largely new models. And I think that's kind of the key to how to release those flat books. Like, I know GW wants to get their money. They want you to pay another $50. But I think it would hurt less if you, instead of paying that $50 to get a new sub-faction that's just strictly better than everything else or whatever, it's so you could get access to the story of how this new hero got introduced, and then buy the new hero model, and congrats, you have a hero. But like adding a character to your army, is it gonna break the sort of mental bank? And I think that was just super clever. And it doesn't add to the complexity Ouroboros as we, consume ourselves from the exponential storm of complexity that cannot continue to get squared and raised and grown.
Well, I think that with individual characters, right? Like in Broken Realms, I like that for its time, but I think going forward, a better solution for GW, and it's something I would much prefer to see, is them go, like, here's like the Be'lakor release, right? They go, here's the Be'lakor release, boom. Here's the brand new $160 model. You want it, you love it, it looks glorious, it's beautiful, right? Here you go. Released next to it is a FAQ-like supplement for your faction to allow you to have some extra small rules with it and his data sheet, and that should just come in next to the model.
I do as well, but it was sadly. But I want. I just want to set it out for the viewers. If someone's out there like, yeah, we should do that, I agree, but it won't.
Yeah, until we have a full digital game, there's not with a subscription service. It's not in their best interest currently.
They want to make the money. If anything, they want to make more money than they did last year. And currently, they've got it to where they can get an extra $50 per person per HQ model that they release on top of the price of the HQ model. So they wouldn't step back for just to be nice because it would be convenient. Although it would be very convenient. It would be a bro move, GW. Just say it, bro move.
Unfortunately, GW is not a person whom we play this game with in a game store. GW is a corporate entity, almost like a Lovecraftian monster. James Workshop, the 5th Chaos God.
6th. Remember, they made your Horned Rat a Chaos God. Technically.
Oh, that's an agency where I was talking about 40K. Like, James Workshop's clearly a sci-fi dystopian entity, but okay.
Yeah, I largely agree with you. I don't think that it's, I don't think we're at a level where it's unsustainable. Every codex seems roughly as complicated as the last one, so I don't think that we're necessarily, like, ramping up. If like Space Marine started kind of at like a level 5, and then we went up to a 6, and then an 8, and then a 10 with orcs, I'd be looking forward going, how the hell are we going to get to a 12? Like, we've run out of scale.
Yeah, but just like all of the like all of the complexity seems to be under a level like we'll use old 8th edition Space Marines like when they first came out as a barometer of like a 5, right? I think all of the 9th edition books are a minimum like 6 going up to like an 8.
I don't think that we're necessarily exponentially rising. And with the release of the AOS battle tomes, we actually had one of the tomes take a step back in complexity. Like, really, really good to see that the Stormcast Eternals book wasn't as complicated. Because, presumably, I mean, I'm not a designer sitting in there on the meetings, but presumably because it's the quote-unquote beginner-friendly army and is meant to be a gateway. So instead of giving it a bunch of complicated rules, they just gave them better numbers on the war scroll and kind of called it a day. And that step back gives me a lot of hope that maybe they're aware that the complexity is kind of as high as they should probably push it for most things. And they're, I'm sure they have some 10 out of 10 complexity in their back pocket for like waiting to throw it out with Shadow Elves or Gene Stealer cults in 40k. But if everything else stays level set, that's fine. And I think it is sustainable. And as we were kind of talking about before, I think it adds enough complexity that it is good for the game. We just gotta help people get over those first couple of humps. Like,
I think there's a certain level of social responsibility we have as players of the game and in the community to help people learn how to play the game, which we're going to have to do regardless of how simple or complex
I think now we just got to be more diligent about it, more aware. It's, the old saying, you got to fix your own house. That's probably on my mind because for the past few days I have been fixing my literal house. But it's, I don't know, it's true here. This is the game that we like to play. This is the community we like to breed. It's what we like to sort of grow and engage with. So it's on us to try to make sure that everyone in it is having as much fun as they can if we've got the mental bandwidth to do that.
Like we've said before, be a gate greeter, don't be a gatekeeper. It's just that simple.
So yeah, I do think there is some downsides, but we can mitigate them. And I'm okay with something that we can mitigate. And also, I like having a bunch of list options. So I'm a simple man. Just give me list options. And also give me squats, Games Workshop. That's really the complexity we need. I need squats. I need complex, small, like sturdy men with machine guns. And give me some lady squats also. That's cool too.
Yeah, please give him some squats so that I can fight his squats with one of the multitude of armies I have. I'll probably fight you with Tau. That sounds all right.
Yes,
Tau
versus short people. Great. Love it. But
yeah, Florida.
So what about y'all out there? I mean, we've done a lot of chatting here back and forth. What do you think about complexity? Are you feeling like it's getting more and more difficult to read and understand these codexes or these battle tomes? Are you finding that you're having more difficulty sort of internalizing the information than you did in previous editions? Or maybe you're a new player.
Yeah. Do you think we're full of shit?
We could be.
Yeah, maybe we're full of shit.
You're like, man,
tell us.
Y'all are just dumb. And I'm like, shit, fair.
Man, you guys love huffing your own farts. Yeah,
you got me.
That's cool. Yeah, probably.
Or maybe you're a new player and you don't have a reference. If that's the case, how are y'all doing out there? I hope you're doing all right. If you do have questions or you want to share your thoughts, feel free, drop them in the comment section on YouTube. Or if you're listening on any of the other podcast streaming locations, feel free to reach out to us on social media, Instagram, Twitter. I'm more than happy to talk to you about it there or help you if you are having problems. Lord knows I've also had problems. The whole point of the show is to help people have more fun with the hobby. And we mean it. We'd love to be able to help you get over that hump.
I mean, hell, sometimes I still send rules to Joe and go like, hey, I'm overthinking this. I'm dumb as fuck. Can you tell me what I'm, like, if I'm thinking of this wrong? And then explain what I think it is. And Joe would be like, oh, no, man, you're overthinking the shit out of it. That's dumb as shit.
It's just
Here you
a
go.
+1 to hit.
Yeah. It doesn't let you kill God. Like, I'm sorry, John. You don't get to kill
sorry.
God with that +1 to hit.
Yeah, if
cannot combo
if it
out.
comboed. Yeah, if you guys are having problems, feel free to reach out to us. And if you want to go the extra mile, maybe share this with some friends in your local gaming group who might like it. We'd really appreciate it. It helps other people find the show. But for now, that's been all of our opinions. Bona fide, Kentucky Fried. And we'll see y'all on the next one.
See ya.